In the hush of twilight, when the mountain air grows still and cool, and the last golden light slips behind the peaks, a deep calm settles across the land. Along the shores of Lake Lucerne, the glassy surface reflects the pale glow of fading day, while alpine meadows breathe quietly beneath the rising hush of stars. It is here, amid the hushed valleys and steep cliffs, that old stories live on like soft echoes carried on the wind. Tall pines line the winding roads that trail through quiet Swiss villages, their silhouettes darkening against the sky as lanterns begin to glow warmly in cottage windows. In the distance, the melodic clang of a distant bell rolls gently across the hills, fading slowly into the dusk. The mountains loom above, silent and ancient, guardians of tales passed gently from voice to voice, from century to century. And among these stories, one stands quietly, like a firm step upon solid stone, the story of a man with a steady hand, a quiet soul, and a bow that would become a symbol of defiance and hope. His name was William Tell. Though time has softened the lines between history and legend, his tale continues to echo gently in the hearts of those who cherish freedom, family, and the simple courage of doing what is right. This is a story of quiet strength, the kind that stands still when asked to kneel, that holds steady when tested by those in power. A man of the mountains, a father, and a figure whose story rises like mist from the lake each morning, whispering of apple trees, hidden arrows, and paths taken beneath towering cliffs. Welcome to Sleepy Journeys, the podcast designed to lull you into a peaceful slumber with soothing stories through time, luminaries, and wonder. Whether you're winding down after a long day or simply looking for a peaceful escape, you're in the right place. My name's Jack, and I'm so happy to have you here with me. Each night on Sleepy Journeys, we set off together on gentle adventures designed to soothe your mind and ease you into rest. You'll find journeys through history, comforting fairy tales, myths and folklore, inspiring famous figures, and the rich world of music history. Wherever your curiosity takes you, there's a dreamy Sleepy Journeys show for you. Tonight, we're going to embark on a gentle journey through William Tell, a heroic legend. And just before we fully drift off, if you're enjoying Sleepy Journeys, go ahead and tap follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're joining me on, and sign up to my newsletter at sleepyjourneys.com. That way, you won't miss any of my upcoming sleepy adventures. Now, take a deep breath, and let's begin. Nestled within the heart of Europe, Switzerland is a land shaped by the steady rhythms of wind, water, and stone. Its mountains rise with timeless grace, their snow-capped peaks catching the first and last light of every day. Valleys open like folded pages between alpine ridges, where green pastures and slow-moving cows are as much a part of the scenery as the clouds that drift lazily above. The land is quiet, the kind of quiet that feels full of echoes, full of age, full of the breath of seasons rolling slowly over the hillsides. In the distance, church bells chime across villages, mingling with the calls of shepherds and the soft lapping of water against wooden docks. The lakes are deep and still, mirroring the skies and the rugged silhouettes of cliffs that cradle them gently. In this stillness, In these winding roads and watchful peaks, legends have rooted themselves like ancient trees, growing slowly, calmly, and deeply into the memory of the land. One such legend begins here, among the lakes and the mountains, in the simple lives of those who called these valleys home. Long before the nation of Switzerland took shape, this region was home to a scattering of forested cantons, small communities, nestled in valleys and on lake shores, each with its own rhythm and traditions. The people who lived here were close to the land. Their homes were built from thick timber, their days marked by farming, weaving, and tending animals along terraced pastures. Summers were filled with the scent of wildflowers and the sound of cowbells drifting through the hills. Winters blanketed everything in hush, turning the world white and still, as fires crackled in stone hearths and stories were passed softly from generation to generation. These cantons were bound by shared values, community, independence, and respect for the rhythms of nature. The elders settled disputes beneath old linden trees, and decisions were made through quiet consensus in village squares. Each home, each field, each path through the forest belonged as much to the people as it did to the earth itself. Evenings were slow and kind. Children listened wide-eyed as their parents spoke of ancient days, of forest spirits and mountain giants, and of simple heroes who stood firm for what was right. Through it all, the land held them, vast and calm and constant. Yet, even in such peaceful valleys, change has a way of finding its way in. As the 13th century unfurled, the great Habsburg family began to extend its reach, its noble lineage casting long shadows across the alpine passes. The cantons, once free to shape their lives according to local tradition, found themselves under the gaze of foreign rulers who sought control from afar. Bailiffs arrived, men appointed to enforce taxes and laws, often unfamiliar with the land they governed. Their coats bore crests of distant courts. They brought edicts and symbols, ceremonies and declarations, and with them came quiet tension. The people, who had long lived in quiet independence, felt the shift beneath their feet, like the faint groaning of an unseen glacier. These new rulers often misunderstood the stillness of the valleys. They mistook simplicity for weakness, silence for consent. But the mountains remember everything, and within the hearts of the people stirred a quiet knowing, a sense that the wind does not always blow in one direction, and that even the tallest peaks can shelter seeds of resistance. And so, in these mountain-shadowed cantons, the gentle stirrings of legend began to take shape in the quiet choices of ordinary people whose strength lay in patience, purpose, and the deep roots of their homeland. The legend of William Tell rises quietly from the valleys, with the calm assurance of a man in rhythm with the land. He is remembered for the steadiness of his hand, the depth of his love for his family, and the quiet defiance of his choices. His tale begins, like so many enduring stories, in a modest home near the village of Burglen, surrounded by forested slopes and the lull of nearby waters. The Tell family lived simply. Their world was made of timber and stone, of tools sharpened by use, and of values passed down like treasured heirlooms. William was known among his neighbors for his skill with a crossbow, a tool he used for sustenance, protection, and the occasional challenge among friends. Even more than his aim, it was his quiet presence that made people speak his name with respect. There was a stillness in him, a clarity, like the surface of a mountain lake at dawn. He was tall and strong, but without boast. His eyes, as the stories go, mirrored the forests, deep, watchful, and calm. He moved with purpose, whether tending to his land, walking the mountain trails, or listening to the words of elders at the village square. While he rarely sought the attention of others, it had a way of finding him from the steady way he stood, like a pine that bends but does not break. The village of Burglen sat quietly at the foot of the Alps, its wooden houses tucked close together, roofs sloping under the weight of winter snow. Smoke curled gently from stone chimneys, and children played in the meadows, where wildflowers nodded beneath the sun. It was in this village that William Tell's reputation first took root as a neighbor, a woodsman, and an archer whose skill was unmatched. Each morning, Tell would rise before the light crested the peaks. He would walk the narrow paths leading into the forest, his bow slung over his shoulder, a quiet companion rather than a weapon. He hunted with care, never more than needed, always with respect for the creatures and the land. When he walked beneath the trees, it was as though the branches leaned just slightly to let him pass. The forest, it seemed, knew him. His bow was crafted by hand, its curve tuned perfectly to his strength and style. The arrows he used were balanced with care, their shafts smoothed from local ash and tipped with carefully filed iron. The secret of his aim was not in the tools. It was in his patience, in the way he stood perfectly still, eyes focused, breath quiet. His shots came only when they were ready, and they rarely missed. Villagers would speak of watching him split a branch from across a clearing or catch a falling apple in midair. In competitions held on feast days, others would boast and laugh, but Tell was always quiet, stepping forward with a nod, loosing his arrow, and stepping back as the crowd murmured with quiet awe. Despite his skill, William never sought renown. His pride lay elsewhere, in a well-built home, in a field tended with care, in a family gathered close around a warm table. He found joy in the rhythm of life, in the rustle of leaves on a windless day, or the way snow settles gently on a fence rail. He lived fully in each moment, and perhaps that is what made him ready, when his time came, to do what many others could not. William Tell's heart beat most steadily at home. His wife, whose name has been softened by time into the mist of legend, was a woman of equal calm, thoughtful, clear-eyed, and strong in quiet ways. Together, they raised their children with care, teaching them through example rather than command. Their home was not large, but it was warm, built with sturdy beams and filled with laughter and the scent of bread baking on winter mornings. Tell's oldest son, Walter, often followed his father through the forest, mimicking his quiet walk and asking questions in whispers. He would help fletch arrows at the kitchen table, watching intently as William explained the balance of shaft and feather. Their bond was deep, made through shared glances, shared work, and the unspoken language between father and child. Evenings in the Tell household were soft and unhurried. Candles flickered in thick-walled rooms as stories were told beside the hearth. The tales were not always heroic. Sometimes they were about ancestors who planted apple trees, or neighbors who outwitted a stubborn goat. William spoke little, but when he did, his words were few and thoughtful, shaped by a man who had long listened to the world around him. His wife often carried the music of the house, humming old songs as she worked, or gently reminding the children to put away their tools before supper. It was a home woven of attentiveness, each member contributing in their way, each one valued. There was no need for raised voices or harsh rules. The rhythms of family life flowed naturally, like a stream moving over stones. To outsiders, there was nothing extraordinary about the Tells. And perhaps that is the truest root of the legend. The extraordinary often rises from the everyday, from the way one chooses to stand, speak, and act when no one else is watching. William Tell did not seek to change the world. He only wished to live rightly in his corner of it, to love his family, honor the land, and hold steady in a world that often asked too much of those who simply wished to be free. In the quiet strength of his home, the seeds of his legend were already growing. In the heart of Altdorf, where the cobbled streets opened into a modest square framed by wooden homes and flowering window boxes, a new structure had quietly appeared one morning. The townspeople noticed it as the fog lifted, a tall, newly carved pole rising from the ground near the center of the square. At its top, resting carefully in the morning breeze, sat a fine hat. It was richly trimmed, upright and spotless, catching light as if placed for admiration. Villagers gathered in soft murmurs, curious and uncertain. The pole stood alone, yet surrounded by guards posted at the square's corners. Soon, an official stepped forward with the scroll in hand. His voice rose in even tones, clear and practiced, as he read aloud a decree from Bailiff Hermann Gessler. All who entered the square, he announced, were to remove their head coverings and show deference to the hat. It stood in place of Gessler himself and was to be honored accordingly, as a gesture of loyalty to the authority that governed the land. The message drifted outward, carried from ear to ear, house to house. By midday, even those in distant cottages along the lake had heard of the order. The pole and hat remained, unmoved and untouched, casting a quiet presence over the rhythm of daily life. Bailiff Gessler had come to the region with formal appointment, sent to uphold the rule of the Habsburg crown. He was known for his measured words and his firm expectations. His decisions traveled quickly through the cantons. The decree about the hat reflected his view of order. Symbols could shape thought, and routine could guide loyalty. The pole was placed with care. The guards stationed around it received clear instruction. Their role was to observe and report, allowing the gesture to settle naturally into daily life. It was intended to serve as a visible reminder of unity and hierarchy, resting quietly above the flow of the square. Many who passed through the square adjusted without hesitation. Merchants paused with hats in hand. Elders nodded in acknowledgement. Even those uncertain of its meaning followed the custom out of habit or caution. The pole became part of the scenery, present in the background of market chatter and children's games. Still, the feeling that surrounded it remained quiet and uncertain. In conversations behind garden gates and around kitchen tables, questions began to take shape. The people had long followed their own rhythms, guided by shared wisdom and local voices. The introduction of a distant symbol invited reflection and awareness. The hat stood through sun and storm, always upright, always waiting. It watched silently over the square, its presence growing more familiar and more quietly significant with each passing day. On a morning washed with light mist and cool breeze, William Tell walked into Altdorf with his son beside him. They followed the familiar trail from their village, its curves lined with trees whose branches arched gently overhead. The path led them toward the square, where errands awaited and neighbors moved through their routines. The town was quiet in its morning rhythm, carts being loaded, shutters opening one by one, and a few early conversations drifting between open doorways. In the center of it all stood the pole, just as it had for weeks. The hat remained pristine, framed by the first touch of sunlight as it crossed the rooftops. William walked the stone path toward the square's far edge, his son keeping close by. They passed under the watchful eye of the guards and continued along their way without pause or hesitation. The day's tasks lay ahead, and their steps followed the curve of familiar patterns. Not far behind them, one of the guards shifted slightly, then turned. A quiet word was exchanged with another. Neither raised a voice. Neither drew attention. But the moment had been noted. By midday, the story had already begun to move. William Tell had entered the square and made no gesture toward the pole. He had walked through with steady presence and had gone about his errands with the same ease he always carried. Word reached the bailiff's hall before the sun reached its highest point. Gessler listened without interruption, his face unreadable as the account was shared. Later, a summons was issued, firm and formal, asking William Tell to appear and speak to his actions. When the time came, Tell stood before the appointed officials. His explanation was simple and clear. He had come to the town on personal business and had not regarded the pole as requiring his attention. No challenge was intended. No disturbance caused. He answered with the same steadiness he brought to his craft and his life. The encounter was brief. Tell returned to his home, and the square returned to its rhythm. But something had changed. In a valley where people marked time by seasons and moonlight, the image of a man walking calmly past a symbol had taken root. As evening fell across the hills and the mist once again gathered near the lake's edge, the story found its way into conversations carried by firelight. The pole still stood. The hat still rested at its peak. And somewhere in the quiet distance, a legend had begun to breathe more deeply. Late autumn drifted across the valleys, weaving golden tones into the trees and brushing the meadows with crisp morning frost. In the forests, leaves rustled with gentle sighs, and the sky grew pale earlier each evening. Around village hearths and within thick-walled kitchens, Fires crackled softly as the season settled in. In Altdorf, life moved along its measured path. The town square held its familiar rhythm, vendors arranging late harvest goods, children chasing fallen leaves, and neighbors exchanging greetings shaped by the chill in the air. At the square's center, the pole still stood, unchanged, the hat atop it catching the sunlight like a mirror held toward the hills. Then came the day when William Tell returned to the square, this time under the guidance of guards. His son walked beside him, their steps steady as they entered the town they both knew well. Around them, villagers turned from their stalls and doorways, their movements soft and uncertain. They watched quietly, sensing the weight of something unfolding. Tell had been summoned once more, this time with purpose that lingered in the air like low cloud. The bailiff had issued a new order, one spoken calmly, but with intent that rippled across the stones of the square. A trial was to take place, though no jury gathered and no papers were read aloud. The trial would unfold through action alone. In the center of the square, a mark was chosen, a place where Tell's young son would stand, still and patient. An apple, plucked from a nearby crate, was carefully placed upon the boy's head. The fruit's red skin shone in the clear light, resting lightly against strands of wind-tousled hair. A short distance away, William Tell was handed his crossbow. It was his own, the weight and curve familiar in his hands, as if it had never been apart from him. The bolt he was given was clean and straight, its point silent and certain. He looked toward his son, who stood with calm trust, the bond between them strong as the mountains that framed the valley. The world grew hushed around them, as if the trees and rooftops leaned closer to witness. Even the breeze seemed to pause, caught in stillness. The line between archer and target stretched quietly across the square, held steady by breath and will. Tell stepped forward. He positioned himself slowly, adjusting the angle of his feet on the stone, lifting the bow in one smooth motion. His eyes focused, shaped by years of quiet practice and the closeness of forest silence. The apple did not move. His son did not waver. The bolt flew in a single motion, cutting the air in silence. It met the apple with a gentle, sudden sound. The fruit split, falling in halves to either side, and the boy remained where he stood, untouched and safe. For a moment longer, the square stayed silent. Then, in small, uncertain gestures, people moved again. A quiet murmur returned to the edges of the square. The child walked to his father, who lowered his bow and met him with a hand on the shoulder, a glance that spoke more than words ever could. The trial had been fulfilled in calm precision. In the eyes of those who had gathered, something profound had taken place, a moment shaped by devotion, skill, and the quiet power of trust. As Tell turned to leave the square, his crossbow still in hand, a question was asked. It came from Gessler, whose voice, though steady, carried a particular weight. The question was simple. Why, he asked, had William Tell placed a second bolt beneath his tunic? The square paused once again, the air still as snow before a fall. Tell's answer came after a breath, with the clarity of a man who chooses each word with care. The second arrow, he explained, had been prepared in case the first had harmed his son. It was not meant for sport or for show. It was carried in silence as a final promise made to his own heart. The meaning settled into the air with quiet depth. No threat had been spoken, no defiance declared. Instead, a deeper truth had been revealed, that a father's love lives not only in moments of joy, but in the readiness to act when love is tested. The response stirred something unspoken in those who listened. Gessler, though composed, gave a signal, and guards stepped forward once more. William Tell's path was not yet his own to walk. He was taken into custody, the second bolt removed and set aside. The square resumed its rhythm with a new memory added to its stones. Even as he was led away, Tell's presence remained grounded. He looked toward his son, offering a nod that carried calm and assurance. The apple had been struck, the trust honored, and a line crossed in silence. By evening, the story had already taken shape of an arrow, a father, and the deep quiet of a love too strong to be swayed by fear. Around fires and in low voices, the tale found new breath. The people of the valleys carried it home in their hearts, sensing that the journey of William Tell was still unfolding, shaped by stillness, strength, and the clear gaze of a man who knew his place in the world. Clouds had begun to gather along the ridgelines, their shapes stretching into low, pale blankets that rolled softly across the sky. The lake, usually calm and reflective, shifted beneath the changing light. A hush seemed to settle over the water from quiet anticipation, the kind that arrives before a change in the air. Along the wooden dock that stretched into the bay, a group of men prepared a boat. It was a large vessel, flat-bottomed and steady, with oars positioned in sockets, worn smooth by years of use. The lake was familiar to these men. They knew its moods, its quiet corners, and its deeper channels. Yet this day held a new purpose. They would be ferrying prisoners. William Tell stood at the edge of the dock, his wrists bound with thick rope, his cloak drawn close against the breeze that skimmed across the water. Guards stood on either side of him, their armor muted beneath the growing cloud cover. Gessler himself was nearby, issuing final instructions with the same cool formality he carried in every task. Tell looked toward the lake. The wind tugged gently at the surface, shaping ripples that moved with increasing urgency. The journey ahead was meant to bring him south, toward a holden place beneath foreign jurisdiction. He was to be taken away from his home and his people, the rhythms of his life placed behind him like stones fading along a shoreline. The boat pushed off with slow determination, oars dipping into the gray-tinged water. Tell sat low in the vessel, his hands secured, his gaze fixed on the shifting lake. Around him, the guards remained quiet, their movements steady and rehearsed. Gessler stood near the center, his cloak pressed close by the rising wind. The lake stretched wide in all directions, framed by mountains whose peaks disappeared into the growing mist. Here and there, waterfalls tumbled gently down the cliffsides, feeding the water with fresh streams born of glacier and rain. But now, even those sounds seemed distant, swallowed by the increasing hum of wind across the surface. The vessel creaked with each pull of the oars. Water lapped gently along the hull, steady and rhythmic. Yet overhead, the clouds thickened. A darker gray had begun to settle, and the scent of rain moved across the air like a memory being stirred. Tell watched the distant shoreline grow fainter. He remained composed, anchored within himself as the boat pressed onward. Though bound, he was not diminished. His breath matched the rhythm of the waves, each inhale calm and complete. Around him, the world shifted with the touch of something older than politics or command, the presence of nature, vast and ungoverned. The lake, ancient and alive, began to rise in voice. The wind picked up, weaving through the boat's framework with a low and growing whistle. Oarsmen leaned harder into their strokes. The guards exchanged quiet looks. Far above, the peaks disappeared behind veils of mist and rain. A storm was approaching. Rain began as a fine mist, brushing skin and wood with tiny, sharp droplets. Then it thickened, falling steadily and cold, tapping on every surface like fingers drumming a warning. Waves grew bolder, lifting the boat and setting it down again with firm insistence. The oars dipped and slipped, the lake no longer easy to navigate. Wind rushed down the mountain corridors, funneling between slopes and sweeping across the water. The boat rocked under the pressure. Shouted commands met resistance from the wind. The guards struggled to remain upright. Gessler gripped the edge of the vessel with a gloved hand, his voice growing louder, urging correction, urging speed. Amid the movement and confusion, Tell's eyes scanned the water. He saw the line of trees on the distant shore, the curve of rock where waves struck with foaming persistence. Between one gust and the next, he noticed the way the boat leaned. And in that moment, a space between wave and word, the opportunity opened. A sudden shift came over the vessel. Water spilled in over the low side. One guard reached out to steady himself. Another lost hold of the oar. Tell stood, his hands still bound, but his footing sure. With practiced motion, he stepped to the edge and let the water take him. The lake closed around him, cold and complete. For a moment, the world became a swirl of gray and current. Then he kicked, turning beneath the surface, his body guiding itself through motion he had known since childhood. The bindings loosened in the struggle, his movements strong and deliberate. He surfaced away from the boat, near the rocky shoreline, his breath steady despite the cold. The voices from the vessel carried across the waves, sharp, surprised, echoing faintly against the cliffs, but they grew fainter with each pull of current. Tell swam to the rocks and climbed from the water, his limbs cold but certain. He found a narrow trail leading up from the lake's edge, one known to those who walk the forest paths often. Trees closed around him. Their trunks were damp, their leaves stirring gently with the wind that now moved inland. He walked into the woods without looking back. Behind him, the storm continued. The lake held the boat in its shifted grip. Gessler would soon realize the journey had changed course. And among the trees, William Tell moved forward with calm determination, free, steady, and silent beneath the cover of ancient pine. The forest that bordered Lake Lucerne grew dense and quiet as autumn deepened. Moss covered the stones beneath fir trees, and fallen leaves created a soft carpet along the winding paths. Among the branches, birds moved silently from perch to perch, and the sound of water trickling down from higher slopes threaded through the stillness like a lullaby whispered in the hush of dusk. Far from the centers of power and pageantry, these woods had always held stories, paths taken by hunters, shepherds, and travelers who knew the land's secret folds. One such path curved gently through a narrow gorge known to locals as the Holloway. Hemmed in by high rock walls and overhanging trees, it offered shelter from wind and concealment from sight. The path had seen the tread of countless boots and hooves, and it had listened quietly to many plans formed in the solitude of its shade. Here, among the stone and pine, William Tell waited. He had found a quiet place beside the trail, hidden beneath a canopy of turning leaves. The damp scent of the forest surrounded him, bark, earth, and the faint sharpness of approaching frost. He stood with calm focus, his crossbow in hand, the weight of it balanced easily along his palm. The arrow was already notched. The Hollow Way was known for its quiet. Even animals moved gently along it, their steps softened by pine needles and layered leaves. Sunlight filtered down in scattered fragments, never reaching the ground in full. William stood among the trees, patient and composed, as the day shifted around him. He had reached this place through deep woods and hidden trails, each step measured and without haste. He carried with him no message, no call to arms, no symbol of rebellion. What he held was a purpose, shaped slowly through days of quiet thought and nights beneath open skies. Voices soon drifted along the path, distant at first, then clearer. Hoofbeats tapped steadily on the stone path, and the jingle of reins broke gently through the forest air. Gessler was approaching. He traveled with guards, their pace relaxed, and their attention turned to the trail ahead. They had chosen the Hollow Way for its shelter from the lingering winds, trusting in its protection. William remained still, part of the woods. His eyes followed the group as they entered the narrow bend, where the rock faces rose on either side. The light dimmed here. The sounds of birds paused. Even the horses seemed to slow. He raised the bow, drawing back with the same calm strength he had used so many times before, in meadows, in forests, and once in a town square when the world had watched. His breath was smooth, steady, unbroken by doubt. The arrow rested in place, balanced and certain. The path held its breath. The arrow moved through the air as if it belonged to the space between moments. It struck its mark. Gessler fell from his saddle, the sound of his fall muffled by the forest floor. The group halted at once, confusion rippling through the guards like wind through tall grass. They dismounted, surrounded their leader, and looked upward, but the woods gave no reply. The path had returned to stillness. William stepped back into the deeper forest. The trees welcomed him as before, folding gently around his presence. He made no further statement. No banner was raised. No words were etched in stone. Only the echo of the arrow remained, soft and complete, moving outward into the memory of the valley. News of what had happened spread in careful whispers. It traveled by firelight and along shepherds' trails, shared with the measured weight of a story that touched something deeper than politics. It became part of the land, folded into the rhythm of the mountains, the stillness of lakes, and the hush of snowfall on early winter mornings. The legend of William Tell grew quietly, shaped by those who remembered the sound of his footsteps, the steadiness of his aim, and the clarity of his silence. In the hollow way, where moss clings gently to the stones and pine needles gather in soft heaps along the trail, the wind carries his story still, with the gentle breath of a people who cherish the simple strength of a man who walked among them. Evening settles over the valleys, bringing with it the hush of returning stillness. Along the edge of Lake Lucerne, the water reflects the soft blue of the fading sky, rippling gently as the breeze moves across its surface. Far off, the tips of the mountains are bathed in the final amber glow of the sun before it slips behind the peaks, leaving a gentle quiet in its wake. The forests grow deeper in shade. Pines sway slightly in the high air, and the faint rustling of leaves drifts through the branches like a lullaby offered by the land itself. Small lights glow in cottage windows scattered across the hillsides. Smoke curls steadily from chimneys, rising into the cooling sky. Within these homes, evening has arrived, slow and comforting, wrapped in warmth and the quiet cadence of shared stories. Somewhere, near a stone hearth, the story of William Tell is being told once more. It comes as a quiet recounting, a tale passed gently from voice to voice, with pauses long enough to let the fire crackle and the wind move softly through the eaves. The story lives in the air like the scent of pine and the memory of footsteps along a mountain trail. In this legend, there are no grand halls or mighty armies, no echoing horns or blazing banners. There is a man who walked with care, who guided his family through the simple patterns of a good life, and who stood steady in moments that asked much of him. His bow was sure, his choices clear, and his path, though shaped by challenge, remained grounded in love, trust, and clarity. As the night deepens, the lake grows still again. The stars begin to gather overhead, quiet, distant, and constant. They shine above the same mountains that once watched over Tell's journey, their peaks resting now beneath the soft hush of snow and wind. The land sleeps, and the story sleeps with it, folded gently into the heart of Switzerland's quiet hills. Let your breath soften, rising and falling like the rhythm of oars across the water. Let your thoughts drift like mist along the treetops. There is nothing to carry now, nothing to hold. Only the quiet path of story, winding slowly into sleep. You are safe. You are surrounded by calm, and the tale is complete. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey. I hope it brought you a little peace, a little wonder, and a little closer to rest. Until next time, sweet dreams.